Hi, this is Tim from Moriel TV and Moriel Radio, here live via Skype with Jacob Prasch. So what does Scripture state on leadership roles in a fellowship?
First of all, we have to understand what heavy shepherding is as defined by Scripture. I knew Chuck Smith, and Chuck Smith, the founder of Calvary Chapel, did not practice heavy shepherding. Neither do most Calvary Chapel pastors practice heavy shepherding. Now, I agree with you that the Moses principle is an Old Testament motif. It does not apply to the New Testament church. It is a misguided model of ecclesiastical polity of church government. The normal New Testament basis to establish church government under Christ is the plurality of elders, where the senior pastor is the primus inter pares, or the first among equals. That is the New Testament norm. The Moses principle, I do not believe, is a New Testament norm. But that does not equate to heavy shepherding. Now, there may be, and there are, individual Calvary chapels who misapply the Moses principle beyond even what the Old Testament does, and says, if you disagree with the pastor, there's something wrong with you. That if you disagree with the pastor, you're in rebellion, even when the pastor may be teaching or doing something that is not scriptural. In Korach's rebellion, people rebelled against Moses when he was doing everything scriptural. He did nothing unscriptural or contrary to the word or law of God when God gave his covenant on Mount Sinai. So, yes, you can point to individual Calvary chapels who may have done it, but I do not think that heavy shepherding is an overall characteristic of the Calvary Chapel movement. Additionally, you can see heavy shepherding in groups that have a plurality of elders, that do not have a monarchical leadership or a hierarchical leadership. You can see heavy shepherding in cults like the Jehovah's Witnesses. It does not exactly equate to a form of church government to have heavy shepherding. There are pastors who are essentially one-man shows, but who do not practice heavy shepherding. On the other hand, there are those who have more scriptural models of church government who do. So we can't equate the model of church government, even when it's not scripturally the correct one, to heavy shepherding. Heavy shepherding is introduced to us in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 34. With force and severity you've dominated them. The kings of Israel and Judah were to be the shepherds of the people. And there was the rebuke of Ezekiel, with force and heavy shepherding, you've dominated them. The theological term that best suits heavy shepherding in the New Testament is, as I pointed out before, Nicolaitanism. Jesus hated the deeds of the Nicolaitans. There are different theories, and I'm not familiar with all of the theories, but we don't know for sure who or what they were. What we do know, however, is what the Greek term means. Nico, suppression of the laity, the people. A clergy class that positioned itself above the people. Reminiscent of what the Sanhedrin did in the Gospels. It was this kind of an idea that Jesus hated. When you see this kind of heavy shepherding, you will normally eventually find some form of exploitation, fleecing the sheep. Not infrequently, you will find sexploitation. Two examples of this would have come out of the Jesus movement. Mo Berg of the Children of God and Stuart Trail of the Church of Bible Understanding, originally the Forever Family. The exploitation and then the sexploitation. Ultimately, however, they get into seriously wrong doctrine, heretical doctrine. That is the course that heavy shepherding tends to take. It is a very bad thing, and it's easy to see why Jesus hated their deeds. But again, this is not to be confused with the Moses principle. The Moses principle is simply what Ignatius of Antioch called monoepiscopacy. Ignatius of Antioch, one of the early church fathers, pre-Nicene, with good intention, implemented a concept that was not scriptural. To stop the spread of heresy in the church, he said that it's those churches who were planted by apostles is where the rest of the churches should get their doctrine, because the doctrine of those churches came directly from the apostles who got it from Jesus. That was his thinking. And therefore, he said, there should be almost a kind of succession where the apostle passed it on to a pastor and that pastor to the next one. This eventually helped lay the basis for the papacy. It was a wrong idea. Now again, Ignatius had many crazy ideas that were not scriptural. He had many crazy ideas. I do not think he was a bad man, but I do think he was a bad theologian. Jesus made it clear, for instance, when they persecute you in one city, flee to the next, in Matthew 10. Contradicting Jesus, Irenaeus taught, if the lions don't attack you and they throw you to the lions, attack the lions, so you won't be robbed of your martyr's crown. Almost like the Islamic doctrine of Shahadi. He was a man with crazy ideas. He was a deplorably bad theologian. His doctrine was not good in many respects. But again, I don't think he was a bad man. I just think he was an ignorant man who was misled and deceived, and who deceived others. But I don't think he was bad in terms of his motive. This was the origin of these unscriptural models of church government, where the pastor or the shepherd was the be-all and end-all. It evolved into a system of metropolitans and then of episcopos, bishops, and all these kinds of things, and ultimately came to the papacy, which is indeed heavy shepherding. The most extreme form of heavy shepherding in the doctrinal sense is the papacy, where the so-called magisterium of the church is subordinated to a man who claims to speak ex cathedra from the chair of Peter and to be infallible. This is truly Antichrist. Putting a man in the place of God, it is truly Antichrist. These popes have been corrupt people to this present day. They've been pedophile protectors, and you're going to tell me that they can speak infallibly. It's absurd. Nonetheless, yes, there can be cases where monoepiscopacy, be it the Moses principle or some other variation, can also be practicing heavy shepherding. But there are also cases where you have monoepiscopacy where there's not heavy shepherding, and places where there is a magisterium or a presbytery or a plurality of elders that are into practicing heavy shepherding. Now, finally, heavy shepherding tends to become cultic. Ultimately, it focuses around giving the authority to a man that belongs to Christ alone. Jesus is the chief shepherd. It becomes a kind of Gnosticism, where you have to get your teaching and your understanding of Scripture from this one person who claims to be more enlightened and have more knowledge than the other people. And if you don't comply with what he says, then you're into rebellion and into sin, and you're the heretic. Again, the papacy is this. Be careful of those things, indeed. But also be careful not to equate aberrational systems or forms of church government with heavy shepherding automatically. It may or may not be the case. I hope this explains the matter, clarifies it on a more practical basis for you. Thank you so much for your question. My name is Jacob Prasch. God bless.